After some time, a merchant, an ingenious, sensible man, Mr. Matthew Adams, who had a pretty collection of books, frequented our printing office, took notice of me, and invited me to see his library, and very kindly proposed to loan me such books as I chose to read. I now took a strong inclination for poetry, and wrote some little pieces. My brother, supposing that it might turn to account, encouraged me, and induced me to compose 2 occasional ballads. One was called The Lighthouse Tragedy, which contained an account of the shipwreck of Captain Worthilake with his 2 daughters. The other was a sailor's song on the taking of the famous Teach, or Blackbeard the pirate. They were wretched stuff, in street ballad style, and when they were printed, my brother sent me about the town to sell them. The first sold prodigiously, the event having been recent and having made a great noise. This success flattered my vanity, but my father discouraged me by criticizing my performance and telling me that verse-makers were generally beggars. Thus I escaped being a poet, and probably a very bad one. But as prose writing had been of great use to me in the course of my life, and was a principal means of my advancement, I shall tell you how, in such a situation, I acquired what little ability I may be supposed to have in that way. A question was once, somehow or other, started between Collins, a friend of his, and me, on the propriety of educating the female sex in learning and their abilities for study. He was of opinion that it was improper, and that they were naturally unequal to it. I took the contrary side, perhaps a little for dispute's sake. He was naturally more eloquent, having a greater plenty of words, and sometimes, as I thought, I was vanquished more by his fluency than by the strength of his reasons. As we parted without setting the point, and were not to see one another again for some time, I sat down and put my arguments in writing, which I copied fair and sent to him. He answered, and I replied. 3 or 4 letters on a side had passed, when my father happened to find my papers and read them. Without entering into the subject of dispute, he took occasion to talk to me about my manner of writing. Observed that though I had the advantage of my antagonist in correcting spelling and pointing, which he attributed to the printing house, I fell far short in elegance of expression, in method, and in perspicuity, of which he convinced me by several instances. I saw the justice of his remarks, and determined to endeavor to improve my style. At this time I met with an odd volume of The Spectator. I had never before seen any of them. I bought it, read it over and over, and was much delighted with it. I thought the writing excellent, and wished if possible to imitate it. With that view I took some of the papers, and making short hints of the sentiments in each sentence, laid them by for a few days, and then, without looking at the book, tried to complete the papers again by expressing each hinted sentiment at length, and as fully as it had been expressed before, in any suitable words that should occur to me. Then I compared my Spectator with the original. I discovered some of my faults, and corrected them. But I found I wanted a stock of words, or a readiness in recollecting and using them, which I thought I should have acquired before that time if I had gone on making verses. But he hadn't gone on making verses. Since the continual search for words of the same import, but of different length to suit the measure, or of different sound for the rhyme, would have laid me under the constant necessity of searching for variety, and also have tended to fix that variety in my mind and make me master of it. So, that's true. And just as a personal side note, I used to have, when I was in high school, I had lists of words taped on the inside of my binders. Just any words that occurred to me that I thought would be useful, perhaps, in making a poem someday. Just words I wanted to use. So these are some words that I had taped inside of one of my binders, sort of out of the fascination that Franklin notes of having had with words. Abnegate, adore, agony, ashen. Banal, boisterous, bow. Cavalier, complaint, conquest, consecrate, command, control, conquer, covet, crush. Digress, defeat, delicate, design, destroy, dictate, dignify, docile, drive. Ecstasy, elevate, erase, euphoria, and it goes on. I've got dozens more. G's, H, I, L, M, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, and W. A section for each of those letters, just words that pop up out of my head, and I write them down, I make a list, and they're raw material for poetry. An interesting note that writing prose, because of the need to look for words of the same meaning with different size or shape or rhyme or whatever, you have to get through a lot of words and then to get the exact emotional import of what you're saying in this or that sentence, because in poetry so much of it is emotion and music, and it's concepts plus music. So there's the magic of knowing lots of words for poetry. But as he finishes here, therefore I took some of the tales in the Spectator and turned them into verse. And after a time, when I had pretty well forgotten the prose, I turned them back again. So he actually turned them into rhyming poems, and then he retranslated them back into prose to see how he had done. I also sometimes jumbled my collection of hints into confusion, and after some weeks endeavored to reduce them into the best order before I began to form the full sentences and complete subject. This was to teach me method in the arrangements of the thoughts. By comparing my work with the original, I discovered many faults and corrected them, but I sometimes had the pleasure to fancy that in certain particulars of small consequence, how modest of him, that in certain particulars of small consequence I had been fortunate enough to improve the method or the language, and this encouraged me to think that I might in time come to be a tolerable English writer, of which I was extremely ambitious. The time I allotted for writing exercises and for reading was at night, or before work began in the morning, or on Sundays, when I contrived to be in the printing house, avoiding as much as I could the constant attendance at public worship, which my father used to exact of me when I was under his care, and which I still continued to consider a duty, though I could not afford time to practice it. He just did not have time for church, even though he thought it's a good thing to do, but he's got to study. He just doesn't have time for that stuff. So those people can go pray. He's got a book to read. When about 16 years of age, I happened to meet with a book written by one Tryon, T-R-Y-O-N, recommending a vegetable diet. I determined to go into it. He became a vegetarian. Did you know Benjamin Franklin was a vegetarian? My brother, being yet unmarried, did not keep house, but boarded himself and his apprentices in another family. My refusing to eat flesh occasioned an inconvenience, and I was frequently chid for my singularity. I made myself acquainted with Tryon's manner of preparing some of his dishes, such as boiling potatoes or rice, making hasty pudding, and a few others, and then proposed to my brother that if he would give me weekly half the money that he paid for board, I would board myself. He instantly agreed to it, and I presently found that I could save half what he paid me. This was an additional fund for buying books. So, his brother pays, let's say, $10 for boarding per month. And Benjamin Franklin says, I'll find my own place, just give me $5. So he gives him $5 a month. And Benjamin Franklin found that he could save about $2.50 of that $5, which was, as he says, an additional fund for buying books. You gotta love this guy. But I had another advantage in it, besides just the buying books. My brother and the rest going from the printing house to their meals, I remained there alone, and dispatching presently my light repast, which was often no more than a biscuit or a slice of bread, a handful of raisins or a tart from the pastry cook's, and a glass of water. Had the rest of the time till their return for study, in which I made the greater progress from that greater clearness of head and quicker apprehension which generally attend temperance in eating and drinking. Now it was that, being on some occasion made ashamed of my ignorance in figures, which I had twice failed learning when at school, I took Cocker's book on arithmetic, and went through the whole by myself with the greatest of ease. I also read Sellers and Sterney's book on navigation, which made me acquainted with the little geometry it contains, but I never proceeded far in that science. I read about this time Locke on Human Understanding, and The Art of Thinking by Messieurs de Port-Royal. Messieurs de Port-Royal. I guess that's by the two Misters Port-Royal. I don't know. While I was intent on improving my language, I met with an English grammar, I think it was Greenwood's, having at the end of it 2 little sketches on the art of rhetoric and logic.